After returning Lex Luthor to prison at the end of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Superman tells Luthor that he'll see him in 20, which proved to be quite the prophetic statement, as it would take 20 years before the two would see each other again on the big screen in Superman Returns, even if it featured an all-new cast. However, a fifth Superman film starring Christopher Reeve was almost made in the early 90s, which would have featured Brainiac, the bottle city of Kandor, and even seen the death of Superman. So let's dive in and find out why it was never made and what could have been Superman 5. The first two Superman films were shot back-to-back and produced by father-son duo Alexander and Ilya Salkind, becoming massive hits at the box office and receiving critical acclaim. Unfortunately, Superman 3 focused more on comedian Richard Pryor and leaned heavily into slapstick comedy. It would fall well short of the first two films both critically and financially, only to be followed by Supergirl, which flat-out bombed. At this point, not only were the Salkinds in deep financial trouble after the underperformance of both of these films, but the film they produced to right the ship, Santa Claus the Movie, also bombed, leaving them in need of money and questioning if the Superman franchise had run its course. At the same time, the Cannon Group, who specialized in producing what many would call B-movies or schlock, also found themselves in financial trouble after a series of box office failures. In desperate need of a blockbuster to turn their company around, they purchased the rights to Superman from the Salkinds. There was just one problem though. Christopher Reeve didn't want to come back after his disappointing experience on Superman 3. In order to entice him to return, Cannon offered him $6 million, agreed to let him develop the story for the film, and even financed his pet project Street Smart. Cannon's goal was to depart from their low-budget roots and make the film with the same level of care and quality as the first two Superman films. And to do that, they turned to Superman 1 director Richard Donner, but he turned them down. So they'd hire Wes Craven instead, who had directed A Nightmare on Elm Street a few years earlier, as well as another DC property, 1982's Swamp Thing, which Craven made to prove to Hollywood studios that he could make action films and wasn't just a horror director. Unfortunately, he and Reeve failed to see eye to eye, leading Reeve to use his power to force Craven out, and request Cannon hire Ron Howard to replace him hot off Cocoon. Instead, Cannon would hire Sidney J. Furie to direct, since he had a reputation for completing movies on time and on budget, even if he had very little experience with special effects. However, in his defense, his horror film The Entity was declared by director Martin Scorsese as one of the scariest movies of all time, while his Vietnam War film The Boys in Company C allegedly strongly influenced Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. Regardless, since Cannon was used to producing low-budget films, they needed considerable money in order to finance the effects-heavy Superman 4. Not only that, but they were in serious financial trouble as their business model, which involved borrowing money against projected future revenues from their film projects, had finally caught up with them as their films failed to perform as expected, leaving the company without enough revenue to cover their loan payments. To keep them afloat, they'd strike a distribution deal with Warner Brothers, and then use the credibility they got from that deal to take out a $65 million line of credit with the First Bank of Boston. However, instead of investing most of this money into Superman 4, which had the greatest chance out of any of their films in production of being a massive hit, they slashed Superman's budget and used the funds to finance all of their other films, of which there were many. For example, in 1986, they made over 30 films, which is an absolutely absurd amount. And they did this because their strategy focused on producing a high volume of low-budget films across various genres, often sacrificing quality for quantity, with the hope that one of their films would occasionally strike gold and become a cult classic or surprise hit. So instead of treating Superman 4 like the big-budget blockbuster it should have been, they just ended up treating it like any other low-budget Cannon film. And the impact on the film would be profound, as Superman 4 required more visual effects shots than all of the previous three Superman movies combined. Yet Cannon mandated that it be produced for a fraction of the cost. As a result, Cannon would rely heavily on blue screen for the flying scenes, which allowed the filmmakers to capture 8 to 10 shots per day, as opposed to the 2 or 3 shots per day on the previous films, using the revolutionary front projection system developed by Zoran Perisic, called the Zoptic process, which won him an Oscar in technical achievement. And while this decision may have saved Cannon time and money, the results speak for themselves. On top of this, location shooting was also kept to a minimum, with the biggest sore spot for Reeve being the decision to shoot Superman's arrival to the United Nations headquarters located in New York at an industrial park in England randomly littered with fake fire hydrants. When the film was finally screened for test audiences, it was a disaster, as Warner Brothers, who had paid to distribute the film, ordered Cannon to cut 45 minutes from Sidney J. Furie's 134-minute director's cut. Eager to be a team player, Furie agreed and told Cannon that they may have to do a few minor reshoots to make it work so the story would make sense. But Cannon refused, not wanting to spend any more money, and gave Furie a week to reduce the runtime, thinking that theater owners could have more screenings per day with a shorter film, resulting in higher profits. This decision infuriated the visual effects department, who complained that had the choice to shorten the film's runtime time been made earlier, they could have allocated more of their budget and resources towards improving the quality of the visual effects shots that ended up in the film, rather than spreading the money out to a bunch of shots that would never see the light of day. However, Cannon did not intend for those scenes to go to waste. Before the film was even released, they began planning for a fifth film and create a narrative out of the 45 minutes of deleted scenes which they planned to combine with new scenes to be shot. So what were those deleted scenes? The most obvious ones that could be repurposed involve Lex's first attempt at creating Nuclear Man, as the Nuclear Man that appears in the theatrical cut of the film is actually the second Nuclear Man that Luthor created in Fury's director's cut. The first Nuclear Man was very similar to Bizarro and saw him fight the Man of Steel outside of a nightclub. Eventually, Superman is able to defeat him by flinging him into an electric pole, killing him. This inspires Lex to use the energy from the sun to create a stronger version for his second attempt. I would imagine a sequel would bring back Clive Mantle as the first Nuclear Man, expand his role, and rename him to Bizarro. Other scenes that could be repurposed are Clark waking up from a nightmare, saving a kid from a tornado, and a few deleted scenes showing Clark's romantic relationship with Lacey Warfield. However, while there's more deleted scenes that were never released, many of the ones that were specifically reference the events in Superman 4, like Superman disarming the world's nuclear weapons. So I'm not sure how these scenes could be repurposed unless they were dubbed with new dialogue, which would just be awful, but not something I'd put past canon. However, considering what a disappointing experience Superman 4 was for Reeve, I highly doubt he would have come back to shoot additional scenes to make a Frankenstein monster of a movie, as he'd blame Superman 4 for hurting his career. Regardless, nothing would ever come of this plan, since not only did Superman 4 bomb, but canon would finally fold, resulting in the Superman rights reverting back to the Salkinds. And while Reeve would worry that he was getting too old to play the character, saying that Superman is permanently 30 and should be recast like James Bond, he was still open to playing the Man of Steel one last time now that the Salkinds own the property again. But the script would have to be brilliant, and the budget on par with the first film adjusted for inflation, in order to have great visual effects, compete with contemporary blockbusters, and attract A-list talent to star opposite him. Luckily for Reeve, Elias Salkind wanted to do just that, and return the series to the high mark achieved in the first two films. While producing the Superboy TV series, writer Cary Bates showed Salkind his spec script for a Superman film he'd written years earlier, inspiring Salkind to use it as a jumping-off point for a new Superman movie. Together with Bates, they'd enlist the help of another Superboy writer, Mark Jones, to write a script with them that would ignore the events of Superman 3 and 4, which is what Superman Returns would do years later. And since this new movie would be a direct continuation of the events following Superman 2, it would be titled Superman Reborn. And Superman Reborn would have opened aboard Brainiac's colossal space arc. Here we meet Brainiac's alien assistant Cosmo, who is busy studying TV signals from Earth. Cosmo's work is interrupted by a distress call from a nearby alien ship, prompting him to urge Brainiac to help them. However, to Cosmos' horror, Brainiac callously destroys the vessel before explaining that his sole purpose is to learn, and this alien species had nothing to teach him. At this point, Cosmo, who secretly harbors deep animosity towards Brainiac, shares Earth's TV signals with him, hoping Brainiac will be interested in traveling there to learn more about the planet and finally meet his end at the hands of the Man of Steel. To Cosmo's relief, Brainiac's interest is piqued as he sets a course for Earth, intending to capture Metropolis and add it to his collection of shrunken alien cities. From here, we cut to Metropolis, and a modern 90s version of the Daily Planet, but still populated by the same cast of characters. However, Lois, frustrated that she always comes second in her relationship with Superman, breaks up with the Man of Steel and begins packing for a move to California after she accepts a job writing for the LA Times. Interestingly, Superman somehow keeps his identity a secret from her, as she's unaware that Superman and Clark are the same person, even though she's been dating Superman for who knows how long. Regardless, as she prepares to say her goodbyes, Brainiac's massive ship arrives and shrinks Metropolis as Brainiac adds it to his interplanetary collection of miniaturized cities. To study the humans, Brainiac clones a police officer and transfers his consciousness to the body, but is overcome with human emotions. Meanwhile, there's pandemonium in Metropolis as everyone tries to figure out what's going on, before Brainiac miniaturizes himself and ventures into the bottled Metropolis to confront Superman, leading to an all-out war between the two of them, as Brainiac wears a belt that shoots energy beams at the Man of Steel, while encasing Brainiac in a force field to protect him from Superman's heat vision. At one point, Brainiac even knocks the globe off the Daily Planet, leading to a moment reminiscent of the one from Superman Returns, where Superman catches it before it falls on a group of onlookers. Eventually, Brainiac blasts Superman with a beam of energy that seemingly vaporizes him, much to Lois's and all the onlookers' shock and horror. Superman then wakes up in an operating room in the bottled city of Kandor, which was once Krypton's capital city. Superman's informed that he was beamed out of Metropolis by them in order to save his life, but here in Kandor, he's powerless under Kandor's artificial red sun. Superman then meets with the Council of Elders to ask for their help in escaping the bottled city to defeat Brainiac. Brainiac, but the Council argues that it's a losing battle and that Superman should accept his fate and rejoin his people, as they view Brainiac as their savior, who rescued their city from Krypton's destruction. Meanwhile, Brainiac chooses Lois to be his teacher for exploring romance and seduction, but she requests a few days to grieve before they begin their studies. After buying herself some time, she befriends Cosmo and learns that Superman is still alive. With his help, Lois enters Kandor to find Superman. In order to get Lois to move on from her past quicker and begin a new life with him, Brainiac begins to slowly deprive Metropolis of oxygen, which he plans to pretend was a malfunction. After Lois finds Superman in Kandor, she helps him escape through a ventilation shaft before Superman turns Metropolis's air back on and returns to full size using a micro-enlarger Lois gave him from Cosmo. Back on the Ark, Superman and Brainiac have an absolutely insane fight, both beings throwing everything they have in their arsenal at the other, as Superman finally wins, but stops short of killing Brainiac, who takes his own life. But that's only his human form, as his giant robotic self appears for round 2. This time, Brainiac gets the better of him and tells him that after he kills him, he'll use his blood to clone his body and transfer his consciousness to it, giving him his powers and Lois. On the verge of defeat, Superman uses the micro-enlarger Lois gave him to shrink down to microscopic size, before entering Brainiac through a pinhole aperture in his eye. Once inside, he plants a metal splinter inside Brainiac's brain and uses the micro-enlarger to get it to grow. Superman quickly flies out the way he came, barely staying ahead of the quickly expanding splinter as it engulfs Brainiac's brain, eventually ripping him apart and killing him. Afterwards, Superman and Lois return to normal size, as Cosmo returns Metropolis to Earth, as well as Brainiac's other shrunken cities to their rightful homes across the galaxy, while also promising to find a new home for Kandor, Krypton's last city. The film ends with Clark revealing to Lois that he's Superman, and tells her he regrets not making time previously to have a life of his own. He tells her that he can live his life without his powers like he did in Kandor, but can't live a life without her. He not only asks her to stay in Metropolis, but to marry him too. She accepts as Superman lifts her up into the air as they fly away to celebrate. For what it's worth, I must admit that I was surprised how much I enjoyed reading this script. Brainiac not only makes for a terrifying villain, but there's plenty of stakes as well, which keep getting raised. Plus, it delves into themes that eventually pop up in Spider-Man 2, exploring the challenges superheroes face as they strive to balance their personal lives with their duties. And even though Salkinds helped write Superman Reborn and may be biased, he's on record saying the script was the best one since Superman 2, and he felt it was fantastic. Salkinds even met with Christopher Reeve for lunch at the Carlisle in New York and claims Reeve was ready to do it. So why didn't it happen? Well, 2 reasons. First, after the enormous success of Batman 89, Warner Brothers realized they had made a colossal mistake selling their rights to Superman over a decade earlier and wanted them back. Exercising their right of script refusal, they rejected the Superman Reborn script and forced the Salkinds to stop production on their Superboy TV series to pave the way for Warner's new series Lois and Clark. A spate of lawsuits would follow, resulting in the Salkinds eventually giving in and selling their Superman rights back to Warner Brothers, which they felt pressured to do after their recent film Christopher Columbus: The Discovery bombed at the box office, resulting in a falling out between father and son and a permanent exit from the film industry for both of them. From here, the script would be rewritten, but retain the same name, and take inspiration from the recent Death of Superman series, as Doomsday would be added to the script. Warner Brothers also wanted it to feature an entirely new cast, feeling Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder had aged out of their roles. This script would eventually evolve into the infamous Superman Lives, to be directed by Tim Burton, which would end up being cancelled before going into production. Regardless, it's a real shame Christopher Reeve never had the opportunity to play the Man of Steel one more time, and conclude his tenure on a high note, as his experience making Superman 4 left him bruised and feeling ashamed and apologetic for it. Having said that, the Superman Reborn script may have been overly ambitious for the visual effects capabilities of the early 90s, leading me to see a situation where if it did go forward, it likely would have faced similar issues to those faced by Superman Lives, where production costs spiraled out of control, leading to its cancellation before even going to camera, or even like Superman 4, where the film proceeded without a sufficient budget, resulting in a cheap-looking production with subpar visual effects. Before his tragic accident, Reeve joked when asked if he'd return to play Superman that they'll get this 18-year-old, he'll teach him to fly in the first reel, and then he'll take the cameo money and split. Sadly, after suffering a tragic accident that paralyzed Reeve from the neck down, it would close the door on him ever returning to the role. However, he'd muster up the courage to return to the franchise for a cameo in Smallville. To accommodate Reeve's condition, the filmmakers initially scheduled the shoot to get shots of Reeve first, allowing him to leave early before getting Tom Welling's close-ups without him. However, ever the professional, Reeve refused to leave, so that Welling would have him to play off of for his close-ups, resulting in Reeve's nurse threatening to call the police if he didn't leave for the sake of his own health and safety. Originally scheduled to be there for 3 hours, Reeve would end up staying for 6.5, where, as predicted years earlier, he'd pass the torch to Tom Welling. However, fans would get to see Reeve as Superman 2 more times on the big screen. First, in Man of Steel, as a result of a visual effects glitch that made Henry Cavill momentarily resemble Reeve, before summoning the strength to destroy the World Engine. And second, in a computer-generated cameo in The Flash that was criticized for looking extremely poor. I personally choose to remember Reeve how he looked in the last shot of Superman the movie, smiling reassuringly at us as he breaks the fourth wall, before majestically flying off past the camera. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.